we go live. It's my new way of rolling, Scott. I just like to go live, and we just warm it up slowly. We had like I think we hit like 200 visitors for the CLE yesterday, or we got really close to 200. And I think that today, when they hear that Scott Horwitz is live with Ross Suter doing CLE, if we don't break over like 150, I'm gonna have to really, I have to really think about you, Scott. I don't know. You got to be you got to have that drawing power. And you're from Chicago. We're not going to hold it against you that you're from Chicago because you guys have a lousy football team like the New York Jets. I'm a Jet fan. Are you a Bears fan?
I'm a Bears fan. That's right.
You are.
I've been to a couple games already this year too.
Well, the tickets must be cheap.
There and we didn't win any of the games I went to, so I should stop going if I ever want us to win.
Yeah, I've gone to a handful of Jet games myself, and I just picked up a pair of tickets for a friend of mine as a gift, and they were pretty expensive. They're playing, they're playing the Washington Commanders.
Really?
Yeah, so that was that was I was a bit of a surprise. I thought I was going to get off easy on a stocking stuffer there. And Ross, your football team, you're a Philadelphia guy. You must be wondering like what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks for you guys. It's really you're circling the drain.
I'm hoping we revert back to the team that was at the beginning of the season rather than what we've had the last 3 weeks.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, the Sixers are hot. You got
I know.
Oh, Lara says go Cowboys. Yeah, Ross really appreciates that. I like the Cowboys. I like Dak. I like their owners is a pretty flamboyant, interesting character. Dallas Cowboys is all American, right? So what are you gonna do? And you know what? And I don't even know anything about sports. I'm just saying this stuff to sound like I know what I'm talking about. But Scott, I'm that kind of guy that when I would go out on a business meeting, I would read the sports page, just somewhat, just like skim it before I went to the meeting, so that I could be like, how about those Knicks? That's but that was my thing. And then like you don't have to say anything because if they're really into the Knicks, they just kind of keep talking.
I've learned to fake it. I'm not a sports guy. I never have been, but
Yeah.
that's
We have that in common. That's great. So you're not a sports guy. You're from Chicago.
Yep.
But you are an attorney. Tell me and tell everybody here online, how you got into the business. What's your background and your specialty?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So that's right. I am an attorney. I do keep up with my CLE, so I'm still licensed, although I don't practice. I'm a recovering attorney. I started my career as a prosecutor. So as soon as I left, when I was in law school, all I wanted to do was try cases. I took a trial ad and advanced trial ad, and I loved my professor for that. I said, "How do I do what you do?" And she said, "Come and be a law clerk for me." So I was a prosecutor for 7 years here in Chicago. Everything, murder cases, and all ran the gamut. And what I quickly learned is I was always very good with homemade graphics. And so I started creating presentations for the attorneys that would try the cases. And slowly they would let me beef up and give them better and better presentations. They started asking me to take on witnesses. They started saying, "Hey, I don't want to bother with this high-tech closing argument. Why don't you give the closing argument?" So I wound up on big, large cases, huge press cases that a young prosecutor had no business being on. And that's how I found out that consulting was a thing. That's how I found you, how I found Magna Legal Services, and I never looked back. And now, we're the largest graphics consulting practice in the country. We consult on every type of case there is, but I don't want to bury the lead, but a lot of what we're going to talk about today are lessons learned in the prosecutor's office, things that are common no matter what kind of case you're consulting on, which is why I think our approach to graphics consulting is so cool and so different than maybe anybody else.
That's pretty cool. I like that. And you are the head of our visual communications division. And what's it like? We did the acquisition of Trial Graphics, which is another phenomenal visual communications shop. How's that gone as far as integrating the two teams?
Well, what's really great about Trial Graphics and Magna, the Magna Graphics Consulting practice, is it's just like I was talking about before. It is, there was so much in common already that it was really a match made in heaven. We're able to sort of finish each other's sentences and get involved in each other's projects because we speak the same language. We think graphics is not about making things pretty or bells and whistles or creating a laser light show. We think it's about helping our clients tell their stories in a way that they couldn't do it without something on the screen to help them, help their audience, whoever it is, judges, jurors, mediators, arbitrators, whoever they're speaking to, help them connect the dots in a way that they can just clearly communicate. Because what we're always saying is that if you can get your story out there cleanly and clearly in a way that your audience will understand, you're going to win your case. And that's what we see as our job.
Awesome. Awesome. How you like that graphic behind me?
I like it. Who is our artist for that?
You would never guess in a million years, but she's amazing. She's got so many talents. It's our very own Christina Mukina. She actually has that talent as well. So she's got a lot going on.
Well, I don't know if she's looking for a new position, you know?
Yeah, I got to speed up because we just cracked the 100. So I don't want to spoil it. But real quickly, Ross Suter, for those of you that don't know, he's also a recovering litigator, trial attorney, and he actually is Scott's sponsor, and they are in a recovering lawyer 12-step program. I hope that you've got Scott working all the steps and all that stuff, Ross. So we appreciate you. Ross, you have a background in graphics. Real quickly, can you give a little background on your journey to becoming a consultant with Magna?
Yeah, so it's a little similar to Scott in the sense that I was a practicing attorney in Philadelphia. I was litigating, doing insurance defense litigation for the most part. Did that for about 7 or 8 years and decided to see what else was out there. And I ultimately ended up working for a graphics consulting firm, litigation graphics consulting firm. Did that for a couple years, worked for an intellectual property consulting firm, and then was fortunate enough to start with Magna about 15 years ago. So I've been here for quite some time. I've got to see the growth. It's been incredible. The additions of Scott and his team are amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, everybody, we've got 101 people. So you guys, you did good. You had great drawing power. And they're in for, or let me just say audience members or CLE folks, you're in for a real treat because, both of these folks are super bright and they've got great, great experience. If you like what you hear, you can reach out to your Magna sales rep. You can call our toll-free number, which is 866-624-6221, or is 866 Magna 21. Or you can reach out to Scott or Ross directly, and we'd be happy to give you a free consultation on any one of your cases, give you an evaluation, recommendations, and if you want to hire us, then we can start the the meter running. So without further ado, unless I missed anything, Ross, I'm going to let you guys get rolling here.
No, thank you. I'll just add on a couple of the administrative things. One, you will get a certificate of attendance sent to you within the next week. Two, if you have any questions, feel free to use either the chat function or the Q&A function, both of which should be down at the bottom there. We welcome your questions. We want to make this as interactive as possible for you. I realize you can't ask oral questions, but you can feel free to write those out. So
hit that chat bar and throw them some curveballs. They love that. They'll be talking about it in their recovering attorney support group afterwards. So hit them hard. And I see you got all the services up there. This is what we do at Magna Legal Services. In addition to CLEs, we're an end-to-end litigation consulting company. So court reporting, medical record retrieval services, language services, social media surveillance, all things video, virtual and audio, graphics, as you're going to hear about now, and jury research, mock trials, focus groups, witness communication training, the strategic voir dire questions, and then the trial presentation, which goes hand in hand with the graphics. We do it all. Reach out to your rep, and thank you very much. And you may carry on, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Oh, hey, everyone. Let's get this presentation going. So we're here to talk about maximizing litigation graphics. And you heard me already sort of talking a little bit earlier. We think graphics are so important, and it's not because graphics are all about bells and whistles, all about making things interesting. They are that, right? And they do that too. But let's really talk about why we say graphics are so important, right? And this is something that Ross and I get to talk about all the time, that people are visual learners, right, Ross?
Absolutely. And the majority of us are. And as a society, we have definitely become much more visual in the way we get our information.
Please.
I was going to say, we also hold conferences, and interestingly enough, we had Stephen A. Smith speak at one of them, and he had a great quote where he said, "There's a reason why radio outsells newspapers and TV outsells both of them. It's because of that visual aspect. People want to get their information that way. It's much easier to digest, and most importantly, or as importantly as the persuasive nature, get them to retain that information."
Yeah, that's right. And we're going to be talking a lot about retention as we kind of go through this. What we've learned, right? Because just like you heard Peter say, Magna does jury research every week, multiple jury research exercises, and we take data. And what our data has shown us is because we ask our mock panelists about this, what are they retaining? And what studies are showing now is that what you see and hear is retained so much more. So for instance, if you give an opening statement, 3 days later, if you're using visuals while delivering that opening statement, it's going to be so much more retained than if you had just told a story. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's just like Ross said too. There's a reason now on the news, there's always a box floating above the shoulder of whoever is talking on the news. And they're showing pictures of what's going on. It's so that it's a little bit more memorable, but it also makes it easier for the presenter to be talking about whatever the news story is. So let me roll it back. This is what we say jurors responding to just simple facts and data, right? And that's what we're concerned about is we want to keep their interest. But the way to keep somebody's interest, it's only going to be so interesting if you're showing pretty pictures. What's actually going to keep their interest when you're delivering a presentation and when you're communicating is if you can make sure that they're actually understanding what it is that you're explaining. And so what we'd like to...
I'm going to add in, Scott, for those of you that attended yesterday, this is really dovetails nicely into that, science of storytelling.
Yeah.
Getting your themes, getting your stories out there. And as this slide, and Scott will talk about more, sell your case to the judge or to the judge, jurors, whomever is the trier of fact.
Yeah. It's what we call picture superiority is what you're seeing here. So myself, I'm an advertising major, actually. So before law school, I studied and I thought I was going to get into advertising. So I was a big fan of like the Clio Awards, the Oscars of advertising. This is a very famous ad campaign by Verizon. They've already rolled out 5G. So back when they were rolling out 4G, this dates us all if anybody remembers this, when this ad was being rolled out. But Verizon did an exceptional job at communicating that they had the biggest 4G LTE rollout. What a lot of our clients do when they're trying to communicate is they will put it up on the side. We have the biggest 4G LTE network. We built the most towers, second bullet point. We laid the most sort of cable on the ground. We have the biggest amount of infrastructure, point after point after point. That is not a visual way to tell a story and communicate. You could do that. Or you can do what we call picture superiority, communicate all of that in a snap. And that's what you're seeing here on the screen. That's why we like to show this ad first, because it's a really strong example. And we're going to turn back to it as we continue this presentation. It's a really strong example of what we call picture superiority in effect. Everything Verizon wants you to know about their 4G LTE rollout is communicated with this one map, this map big red. And before we get into litigation graphics, we want you to see a strong example that has nothing to do with litigation of picture superiority, because we're going to be talking a lot about it with litigation graphics. So let me move forward before we get into sort of the samples and talk to you about the graphics specifically. Why are visuals so much more easily remembered? I mean, our eyes are latching onto concepts and ideas that are coming at us. And if you're sitting there on a jury, or even if you're a judge listening to a case, it's not easy. It's very easy to get filter overflow. What we love about visuals is they are a method to managing complexity. And that's really what we think is the most important part about using litigation graphics, is if you have a complex story that you need to tell, this is a shortcut to the brain of your audience to manage how complex it is. You've been living with your cases for years, maybe even a decade. You have all of those shortcuts. You know everything there's to know about your case, but you are now presenting it to a group of people who may know nothing about your case, and let alone aren't used to dealing with sort of the complexities of litigation. And so this, using visuals, is the way to shortcut it. But here I am now sort of doing what I told you not to do, right? Which is over-explaining, putting words up on the screen, and not using picture superiority. What I should be doing instead is explaining everything so that you understand it in a snap, just like that Verizon Big Red map. So let's do that, right? Ross, do you want to tee this one up?
Sure. So think about it. You're telling a story, and this is a very, very simple example, right? But if you're dealing with something that's much more complex, that jurors might not be able to wrap their head around. They might be actually fearful of the topic because they think I'm more apt or better off in a auto accident case or a slip and fall. And this is a technical products liability or construction case. And I have no background in this. This is you being able to control your message and control what the jurors see in their mind's eye. So you're controlling the message as much as possible, as much as you can do, and as much as you want to. You usually don't want to leave it to the jurors' druthers to make up your version of the case.
And so this is the example, right? If I am delivering a presentation and I say the word dog and I don't have an accompanying visual, I'm now relying on the mental picture that my audience is painting. So me, for instance, sitting on a jury, I'm going to think of the dog in the lower left corner, the little fluff ball. That's the kind of dog I grew up with, right? So this is just an example of why visuals are so important, because without a visual, I just say the word dog, I'm not controlling the mental picture that you're painting. And you might now be connecting the wrong dots and painting the wrong picture. Whereas now, if I'm presenting and I say the word dog and I show a picture of the dog, now I'm controlling the story. And now I'm making sure that my audience is painting the same picture that I want them to understand. This is the reality. This is the kind of dog we're dealing with in the case. This is what I wanted you to understand. And this is me effectively communicating it to you. You're not going to sort of forget what kind of dog I am talking about now when I move on to make my next point. And so
definitely a plaintiff graphic there for sure of the dog.
So fair enough. But the point is the point, right? Is that we need to use visuals to help us tell our stories and to help control the story. The other reason that visuals are so important, we say, is because without them, we know that our audience is going to jump to a certain conclusion. So just like I said, if you say the word dog, I'm going to think of the fluff ball. Let me give you another example, right? Let's use some visuals again to kind of give examples. But this is a true study that was done. And if the sphere or the ball is dropped down the spiral, will it go A, B, or C? Most people would say A, it's going to continue to spiral around and around. But what we know, this is just physics. The answer is actually B. As soon as it comes out of the spiral, it's just going to proceed straight. That's how this works. This is a visual, but what we want you to understand is that your audience, just like I would jump to the dog conclusion, what kind of dog, your audience is going to jump to a certain conclusion, and you need to know what those conclusions are, and you need to overcome that, and you need to tell the real story, your story here in this case. Visuals are the way to do that.
Yeah, and it could be as simple as, why you do something, why a process is in place, why this is the best practice, or at least at the very, on the defense side, why at the time we believe that this was the best way to do it. So that's really what you're able to control and to explain, so they don't have a misunderstanding. There is the hindsight bias aspects of, okay, there was an injury, there was an accident, whatever it is, so it must have been unsafe. Well, not necessarily. It's what we knew then, and here's the reason why, and you can walk them through those steps so they don't misinterpret and think the ball comes out as at B. Oh, and that's the other thing I meant to mention in our admin part of the beginning. You will see questions pop up throughout this. I think there's 3 of them. Please answer them. It's part of the accreditation process. So if you can answer them, they're all very simple, and we'll continue from there. Sorry, Scott.
No, not at all. Yes, please fill out those answers. That's really important. And this is just another example of the conclusions. Most people will say B when we happen to know that the answer here is C, right? And the point is, again, there are conclusions and biases, everything that your audience is going to bring, their personal life experiences. You need to overcome all of those things just so you can clearly tell your story. And one way to clearly overcome that very quickly, the shortcut to doing that is graphics. So what do we think graphics are? Graphics aren't bells and whistles. They're not the laser light show that we were telling you about. What we think graphics are is this that you're seeing on the screen now. It is a shortcut from A to B. It's all about connecting the dots. And the way that we connect dots in graphics, and the way that we encourage you as attorneys, as litigators, to to connect dots is to tell stories, because again, we're back now to managing complexity. What is a story except it is a way to take facts and data and string them together in a way that is understandable, is manageable, and is memorable. Just like Ross said, it's all about retention, and that's what we're really focused on here.
And it's going back to what Scott was saying in that graphic with the straight line versus the squiggly line, right?
Yeah.
That's the squiggly line for jurors. That oftentimes feels like a trial. There might be experts that have to come in at different times because of their availability. It's really stringing that story together as best as possible. And we'll show you examples, whether it's timelines or players charts or whatever it may be, to give them, to orient them. So, okay, this is what we need to understand. This is what is important. And this is what it actually looked like.
That's right. And so this is what a narrative is. This is what a story is, right? Exposition all the way to the falling action into the resolution. But if you can arrange your evidence in such a way that it becomes a story, you're going to connect those dots. You're going to help your audience manage complexity, and you're going to make sure that your story is understood. So here again is my advertising bias, right? But got exhibits. This also takes me back to my days as a prosecutor, because the sample I'm about to show you now is very similar. So it hits very close to home to me, but this is a case that we consulted on. And it's all about a police shooting. And so here in this matter, we had evidence. And the way that I would have, back in my days as a prosecutor, the way I would have gotten all this into evidence is the traditional way, the way I was taught in school, right? We call the video tech, right? The surveillance video officer, whomever, who can lay a foundation and would say, I'm now showing you camera number 1. Is this fair and accurate? They're now showing you camera number 2, camera number 3. That would leave the stand. And then we would get to the photos, the evidence tech who processed the scene and took the photographs on the scene. And we'd show them, showing you now photograph number 1. Is this true, fair, and accurate? Number 2 and number 3. We'd move on and on. We'd put each officer on the stand and let them go through sort of what they did and what they saw. What we had at the end was a mess, right? And we had to clean it up. And all we had was the closing argument to do it, to then take all the evidence that they had heard in the trial and turn it into a narrative. And it's really all that trials are, right? Is the way that evidence comes in. And so the way that you can then take all of that evidence, all of that mess, that sort of that big ball, and instead of just tying it together in closing argument, but if you can deliver that evidence in a way that provides context, that gives a narrative arc, that lets you become a storyteller, you're going to connect those dots from A to B, and you're going to be using picture superiority. And so again, instead of over-explaining, why don't I just show you what I mean? This is from a case where we took a top-down satellite photo and we illustrated it. We cleaned it up and we made it look a little bit better. And we used this map. This map becomes the baseboard image. This is the springboard or the keystone graphic that we use to launch into all the pieces of evidence that I showed you. And this is how we think. This is our approach to graphics and graphics consulting. We're not trying to rock the world. We're not trying to say that these graphics are so, you've never seen them anywhere else. This is a very sort of common graphic, but it's the way you approach it and the way you think about it and the way you use it to produce your evidence and to tell your story that we think is so important when you're graphics consulting. And that's why we think the way we do it here at Magna is the way to do it. Let me get into this presentation now. So we have our officer approach the corner of the street. And then from there, we start to show the foot chase. And now we're going to launch into our first piece of evidence. So instead of just showing camera number 1, we're showing the first camera chronologically in time. And we're going to continue to show the chase with context going on the screen. So now you understand where this camera is. You understand where we are in the chase. We're not necessarily showing you camera number 1. Maybe this is camera 14, but it's the second one chronologically as they round the corner of the street and turn into the alley. The arrows on screen are giving you that context. They're providing meaning. And that's really going to help you as an audience member understand what the next piece of evidence is. It's our last surveillance video. This is the chase that goes into the alley. And now we're going to get into our empty lot. And here comes our first photograph from our evidence technician. And now here's our shooting in the lot. We're going to do a zoom in on the lot. And we're going to show you a picture of the lot, and we're going to have some on-screen annotation to help you sort of see and understand what happened from our perspective and our point of view. Here's our second shot. And now we're going to use the map graphic as our keystone to launch into the remainder of what happened after the shooting, after the foot chase, where evidence was recovered, where witnesses were standing. The whole point of this presentation is to have the map provide the context to help me tell my story to you, the audience, to the jury, so that you know the facts, how we say they happen from our point of view. It's how we're going to introduce evidence, and it's how we're going to kind of continue to tell our story. That's what sort of all of this is about. It's all just about telling stories, managing complexity, making sure information is retained in a memorable way, so that when your jury goes back to deliberate, that they remember all the things that you expected them to remember.
And rather than having or being just forced to read the police report, which would be a little more scientific, right? Or probably, I don't want to say military, but it's, followed the perpetrator onto so-and-so street going northbound, made a right on the alleyway. This brings it to life to people. Now they're all going to see it the same way. They all are going to, they're going to understand what happened, how he made it to this alleyway. And at this point, this is where the first encounters, the violent encounters occurred.
It's the same as us showing you the picture of the dog to make sure that you were thinking of the right kind of dog. Now you understand the right kind of foot chase. It's the same as Verizon showing you Big Red, showing you the big 4G LTE rollout. We want you to understand it. We want to be able to communicate it the most efficient way possible. Let's talk about what the buckets are, because here we go. We're about to get into concrete litigation samples. The buckets are sort of how I thought about litigation graphics when I was still trying cases. As being in the prosecutor's office, I actually got involved in just about every type of case there was. So it wasn't just criminal matters. It was plenty of those, but it was also commercial litigation cases. It was white collar crime. It was financial crimes. We got involved in medical malpractice matters. We got involved in employment disputes. I tried just about every type of case that there was. And what I found were these commonalities, and I'm calling them the buckets today, but they're the categories. But these are things that as I became less of a trial attorney and more of a consultant, before I even knew consulting was a thing, I would sit down with the lead attorney anywhere in the office. There were over 900 attorneys that I would work with. And they'd say, tell me about your case. And this is what Magna does now. You jump on a call with us, with somebody from our graphics team, and we say, lay your problems at our feet. Tell us about your case. What's giving you anxiety about your case that you think you need graphics to tell your story, right? Because we don't want somebody to come to us and go, we need a timeline, right? We want somebody to come to us and go, we have this story and we don't know how to tell it. I start running through what I call the buckets, because I found that there's a need for a graphic like this. Of all the types of graphics there are, they sort of firmly and neatly fit into one of these 5 different buckets, right? And those are going to be timelines, flowcharts, maps, tutorials, and data-driven graphics. So I would run through this like it's a checklist. As I'm hearing this story, is there a need for a timeline in this case? Is there a need for a flowchart? And I'm going to talk to you now, and Ross and I are going to really walk you through why we think these buckets are something you should be running through when you're thinking about your own cases and when you're thinking about using graphics to tell your story to jurors.
And Scott, before we move on, there was a question regarding the officer shooting graphic you showed, and I don't know if you recall, how was it the officer testimony that was used along with the graphics? Was it multiple witnesses that was used? Was it used in either opening or closing? Do you recall?
Yeah, so what we showed was the closing argument graphic there. And the way that would come into evidence would be just like I described the traditional way first. You call the evidence technician, you lay a foundation for the video, you call the other evidence tech who took the photos, you lay a foundation. Those all come into evidence. And then at that point, you can use a presentation like that with a witness on the stand, and you can ask them, did you assist in the creation of a PowerPoint presentation that would assist you in illustrating your testimony? If it uses other pieces of evidence that are the foundation is laid and they're in evidence, then that's the foundation that you would need to lay with the witness. And if they assisted in this presentation and it's composed of text and arrows and other pieces of evidence that are already there in evidence, then it gets in and you can use it on the stand. And usually motions in limine, these things are disclosed ahead of time and they're litigated about. So everyone's on the same page that officer so-and-so is going to hit the stand and they're going to use this presentation as part of their testimony. And then you can repurpose and repackage it like we did so that you can tell the story again in closing argument, because now that PowerPoint is in evidence, the annotated version of it with the map and everything else. So ultimately, the foundation there is that would it assist you in illustrating your testimony to the jury? If it does, and there's nothing objectionable in it, then there's no problem in using it. And it's actually something that, I'm from Chicago, I taught advanced trial advocacy at John Marshall Law School for a number of years. This is what we went over. This is what we drilled into the students when I would teach this course, all about how to use exhibits like this in court, get them into evidence, and then use them effectively. And really that's what we're here to talk to you about a little bit today. I hope that answers the question, but this is something that I really do enjoy talking about. So I'm happy to kind of keep the conversation going too. Let's get into timelines, right? Timelines are the most popular graphic, I think, that we work on here at Magna Legal Services. And there's a really good reason for that. We were talking to you before about managing complexity, right? Timelines are all about managing complexity. They keep everything in order and they keep everything in context, so that if you're talking about events that occurred over time, you can show some events occurring years apart and other events that are occurring minutes apart. That context is so key and important, and it often gets lost in storytelling when you've moved on to another phase of your story and your audience is going, hey, but like, did this happen a couple weeks later, a couple months later? Timelines help them manage all of that complexity. So let's get into some samples, because I need to stop over explaining and I need to start showing you things again, right? Because I don't want everybody falling asleep like I showed you in that picture from before. So here's a timeline. I think this is a cool timeline. It's clean. It tells a story, a little bit of a story already. You've got a little bit of that dip and then that escalation. It's pretty readable, but this is not a perfect timeline. This is nowhere near that big red picture superiority Verizon map that we had showed you before, right? So what do we do as consultants to sort of take this timeline and make it a little bit closer to that big red map, that picture superiority? There's a couple things that I say we can do. The first thing is we'll add a little bit of color coding. What the color coding is going to do is make certain timeline flags stand out from other timeline flags. So it's just a mental trick right now, right, to help you manage the complexity, maybe make things a little bit more memorable. What else can we do? Even if I'm going to assume no one's reading anything on this timeline unless I walk you through it, I'm now going to add some icons. And what these icons, I think, help us do is direct our eye and give us more information, a shortcut to certain information that is on our timeline, just by having a little bit of a visual there. And then finally, the last step I'm going to do is I'm going to add some background shading and some category headers. Here now, I think you get much closer to that snap, that big red Verizon map that I was telling you about before, for a lot of different reasons. But if you just step back and you don't read anything and you look at this map, you can kind of see the story already. Bad stuff happened at Memorial Hospital. Our client, University Medical Center, is in blue, and we didn't do anything wrong. It's a tragedy what happened in this case, but it had nothing to do with our care and treatment. And that's the story that this timeline is now telling. And you're getting much closer to that picture superiority, that big red map, because of what you're seeing here on this timeline. I see a question. Will we have access to the slides after the presentation? This is something that we can talk to everybody about, but we can definitely help we can definitely talk to folks about that. Let me continue on kind of with the samples. This is a before. So this is not a great graphic. This is not something that we would recommend you use in court. But what I really like about this sample is this is the before. And now let me show you the after. So this was a patent case or an intellectual property case. And we're talking about the sale of the invention. And what our graphics consultants did was take that sort of that mess that you saw before and translate it into the graphic here that you're seeing now. The graphic that you're seeing now it's a timeline, but it doesn't quite have that big red picture superiority that we were talking about. What we'd like everyone to see sort of is what I do now, which is on a click, I fade everything else out and I zero in, I make sort of my audience focus on what really matters here in this case, right? Which is the sale of the invention and then the 1-year filing window. The sale of the invention happened on December 21st, 1993. They blew the 1-year filing window. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, but once again, like there's nothing we can do here in this case. They missed their filing window, and we need to move on. That's the message, and that's the story here in this case, and that's what this sort of timeline is all about.
And I will add, like the first Rorschach test graphic that's got put up there with all the colors, jurors generally aren't going to work that hard for you. If it's not easily digestible or understandable right away, then they may shut down. So we don't want to put all the information up there once. Usually, this is a different type of presentation than you would at trial. You want to layer it in and tell that story and move them through each element. So then you can summarize at the end and say, okay, well, You know, you've heard all this, you've heard everything the other side said, but let's really focus in here, ladies and gentlemen. What's the important time frame? What are we looking at? What's relevant? And it's this, 2-year window right here.
That's right. And timelines are great about context. And so what you're seeing here is that timelines aren't just a way to show events over time. They can be the springboard, just like the map was before, to other facts and data that are in your case here. So we have a data-driven component on this timeline now, right? We're showing money over time and then events that happened in time as well. What's so great about this sample is you can really see at the end of 2018, man, did that valuation go up? That's a big part of this story. And that's picture superiority. That's the Verizon big red map. Once again, the first thing your eye sees on this is wow, that's a lot of purple off on the right, or that's a lot of blue off on the right. What happened on August 17th that made the valuation go bananas? This timeline graphic tells that story, and that's really going to be a big part of your case. So that's why we like to think about timelines as a way to tell these kind of key stories that we're trying to tell. Timelines also don't have to be limited or regulated to a single slide. I'm going to show you now what we call an interactive PowerPoint scrolling timeline. So this PowerPoint timeline that you're seeing here scrolls over multiple slides. I'm using just the back and forth arrows on my keyboard right now to go backwards and forwards in time. There's also a couple things happening that you're probably already seeing and aware of, but conscious decisions were made by the consulting team to sort of communicate to you what's going on in this case. The first thing is that this is what we call a split timeline with flags that are flying above and below the spine. The spine of the timeline is running down the center. So in this case here, our client, right, is company B. We're above the line. All the events, the things that were known to us are above the spine of the timeline. Things that company A did that we wish we knew about, those are things that are below the line. And there's a little connotation there already, right? They're a little dubious, things we don't know about, things that we say are underhanded. Those are now below the line. So it's a great way to categorize the events that were in this case. So that's the story we're telling. You can see, look at all the things that they did in this time period, and there's nothing above the spine of the timeline. All these things were done and none of it was communicated to us. And then finally, toward the end of time, they finally inform us of their performance shortfalls after we made all these costly decisions, right? And now we're here litigating because of the damage that they caused. So that's the story here. And instead of trying to cram all these events onto one slide and making it hard to read, we have it spread out over across a series of slides so that we can really walk you through key phases in our timeline here. Interactive scrolling timelines are a great way to break up your timelines and tell sort of modular stories one slide at a time. And then finally, why we call this interactive is because if I go anywhere on this timeline, I can click on any of these flags and it will take me, it'll drill down into the evidence that supports the flags on my timeline. So just like you saw with the map launches into pieces of evidence. Here, I click on my timeline and it launches into what you're seeing here, the callout graphic. The home button here will take me back home, and I can move forward in time, and I can click on my next event, and I can see my next callout graphic. Here we've got sort of the mini timeline at the bottom that keeps everything still in context. The home button is going to take me back home, and then I can move on to my next slide and can kind of continue telling my story. But these interactive scrolling timelines are just another way of utilizing a timeline to help you connect dots for people.
Yeah, so think about that, using this with an expert or someone like that. You're able to say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Expert, how do you know this? Well, it's in the records. It was on this document. You can pull that up and it's probably marked as exhibit and really focus in the jurors, that is, focus them in and the testifying person into why are we saying this? Why is this important? And how do we know?
Yeah. We have a question about Prezi, which for those who don't know, Prezi is sort of a different application. Everything you're seeing here today is PowerPoint. We do everything in PowerPoint for the most part for a couple of reasons. One, ease of use. We give the raw PowerPoints to our clients. They're your PowerPoints, your presentations. You can take ownership of them. You can make changes to them in the middle of court if the judge makes a ruling you didn't see, or you can send that to us. We'll make the change and we'll send it back to you in the middle of court. We do that too. PowerPoint is super user-friendly. Everyone sort of understands it, and it's universal across multiple platforms. So that's one reason. Prezi, on the other hand, is an application. It's got to run out of Prezi. So there's that little bit of a wrinkle there. But we have seen Prezi used in court. The reason that we don't support it is a couple. But the first thing is everything that you can do in Prezi, you can now do in PowerPoint. It's got the same functionality. But what Prezi does is you design an entire sort of space, and then you zero in on one portion of it, and then you using input commands, you teach it to go up and to the left and to tell whatever story. So it's very similar to the map where you've got your base image, and then you can kind of run through parts of a presentation. PowerPoint does that too. It's just all about in the planning and the way you set it up, using the right transitions and the morph tools that are in PowerPoint. You're actually going to be seeing more samples down the line here throughout the rest of this presentation that do a lot of that zooming in and zooming out that you would expect to see in Prezi, but it's all done in PowerPoint, which means it's quick turn, it's efficient, and frankly, it's a lot more economical for your clients. And that's one of the reasons that we do it.
And I will add that we're not just wed to the PowerPoint too, depending on what the correct product is, what you need. I mean, it's anything from Illustrator to well, we don't use Adobe anymore. I still talk about Adobe, but we use more professional animation type technology if necessary.
We absolutely do. And so we use the Adobe Creative Suite. Like Ross is saying, for 3D now we're using sort of 3D Studio Max. And depending on the 3D artist, we actually have a couple different platforms that we're using from there. But we a lot of the things we design are outside of PowerPoint, using Adobe Illustrator, using Photoshop, using InDesign, but we'll drop them all into PowerPoint again, because then all you have to do is click and advance to make new things happen. Like with the sample that you're seeing here on the screen. This is another sample of a timeline. This has no flags, right? This is almost channels across, and we've got the times bars at the bottom. And the story we're telling here is a construction delay case. And here in this case, our client is the defense. They had a huge project. They hired a firm to handle it. The firm was late and kept missing deadline after deadline, like you're seeing here. And at our own great expense, at some point, we had to terminate them, hire somebody else to get the job done. And then they turned around and they sued us as the plaintiff. So now here we are as the defense, and we're defending ourselves and for our actions. This is the graphic we used in that case to tell that story. And this is sort of that picture superiority effect. Now, I mean, it's pretty clear with all the red that you're now seeing on the screen and all the lateness that occurred. It's all happening, but it's all being communicated to you via this timeline style graphic. And then here, this is the same case, another sort of timeline style graphic. Again, no flags are on the timeline, but you can see in this case what the plaintiff's actual production was versus what they had planned, and how they had fallen short of that almost at every step of the way. And then the sort of unreasonableness of what they forecasted at the time of our lawsuit. So we were going to turn the whole thing around, and we were going to meet these highly unlikely, according to experts, these highly unlikely sort of performances. It just was outside the realm of reasonableness. And that's really what we were stuck with here in this case. And that gets us through our first bucket. So, let's run through the rest of these examples. And I think you'll see we're gonna get a little quicker as we start going through these. But after timelines, I'd say flowcharts are something that we think about in just about every type of case that we consult on. Flowcharts are something that you could consider to be a typical flowchart might be a corporate hierarchy. We've got our CEO, and then our CFO and the COO, and then down from there we sort of have the management team, and then down from there we have the employees. And so a typical sort of top-down CEO at the top, employees at the bottom, corporate hierarchy, that is a very classic org chart. I see that we have a question number 2 up on the screen. So everybody wants to just take a moment to fill that out. We're going to keep going on. So flowcharts, corporate hierarchies are a really classic type of flowchart, but flowcharts can be anything that's you could imagine on screen an arrangement of labels and arrows, right? So it could be a process, right? The termination process in employment disputes. It could be explaining a complex process, step 1, step 2, step 3. Anything that's connected by a series of labels and arrows is really what we're going to consider a flowchart. And so here's a really simple collection of labels and arrows, right? This is something that we collaborated on with an expert in a construction case. This case here was sort of all about a construction injury, and an individual at a construction site was injured, and who was responsible. Our client here, the owners and the general contractors, what are their duties? What are their responsibilities? And who's basically on the hook for these injuries? This was the flow chart that the expert started with, that they sent to us. And what we did is we turned it into the presentation that you're sort of about to see. So Ross, I don't know if you sort of have any thoughts about these types of flow charts, but these are something that we see all the time when we first get involved, and then we turn them into something else.
Yeah, I mean, we all see those type of kind of stick figure-esque,
Yeah,
this type of flow chart, right? This is used common, but it really doesn't push the ball forward that much. I mean, it might be good to put up if you're going to be doing a long trial and you want to orient people, and you know, you'd have them named and all, but it doesn't really give the roles and responsibilities.
that's right. And it doesn't tell a story, right? What tells a story is what you're seeing here now, which is what we created with the expert. And it happens over a series of clicks. So we're using the PowerPoint build. That's what we call these, where information is revealed over a series of clicks on a slide. We use the build to direct the eye and to let the expert on the stand, or whoever the storyteller is, let them tell their story, let them testify. Who is the general contractor here in this case? Who is the subcontractor? Who's the subcontractor? Who's the supervisor? And then who's the plaintiff? You'll see already very intentionally here, we're not going from the top down, because we don't want the general contractor we don't want to feel like everything is underneath them. We are going very intentionally from left to right. And now we're going to start using colors and categories to wall off the general contractor and the subcontractor and start talking about the duties and the responsibilities under OSHA of a controlling employer versus what are those duties are under an exposing employer. So here in this case, the creating employer, the one that who caused the injury, who had responsibility for safety, versus the general contractor and the subcontractor here, who did everything they were supposed to under OSHA. Here, the subcontractor and the supervisor, who are liable and cited by OSHA in this case. This is the expert's testimony, and this is the flow chart that they use to kind of tell their story instead of that first sample that we had showed you. Flow charts are also a great way to walk through a process, like I was telling you. So here in this case, the question is, what are electronic health records? Just before we can even get into who's liable and who's not, and what are the damages, this case was all about what we call electronic health records. And what are those? We needed to explain that. So here in this case, you've got a patient, and we're going to use this flow chart to explain what the information is about our patient that is gathered and collected. And then from there, what did we do? It's all collected into an EHR, an electronic health record. And now let's talk about what happens to electronic health record over the life of over the life of these records, and what are they done, and how do they wind up with third parties, and how are they bought and sold on the marketplace, right? They are de-identified, they're scrubbed of personal information. And then from there, you'll see that they're brought into the marketplace. This is the flow chart that we created that was used with an expert on the stand to walk through what happens to electronic health records, how they ultimately wind up not only on the marketplace, but sort of in the hands of the consumer, and how they're scrubbed of personal identification markings.
So while we talk about buckets, there is some overlap, right?
That's
so
right.
This is a flow chart, but it's a tutorial. And,
Right.
and jurors actually really do appreciate that. If you're going to hear a lot about EHR, we need to make sure that we're giving them that the basis of what is it? What does that mean? So they can go, okay, I know what we're talking about.
Yeah. And flow charts are not only what you saw, corporate hierarchies or tutorial style, but they can also be concepts, legal concepts that you need to explain. This is one of the most popular visuals that we make here at Magna. It comes up in almost all the jury research exercises that we get involved with. And it's so simple, but it's so relevant in so many different cases. And it's all about the concept of needing negligence and causation to find for the plaintiff, to find that there are damages. A lot of our mock jurors understand, right, that you need negligence to find for damages. And then they'll be able to cross both bridges, that you need negligence and causation to find yes. Next, they completely understand, right, that if you don't have negligence, you can't find for the plaintiff. So if nobody was negligent, then you cannot find for the plaintiff. But you see where we're going with this, right? Because we've teed it up so much at this point. If you don't have negligence and you don't have causation, of course you can't find for the plaintiff. What do you do in a situation, though, where you do have negligence? This is a concept that fails to get communicated so frequently in our mock trials that we have found that we are recommending this graphic over and over again, just so that our clients can explain this concept so that there's no, nothing gets misconstrued, so that the jurors don't waste their time in deliberations. We don't have to have our moderators come in and right the ship. They get the point, right? You need negligence and you need causation. And here in this case, plaintiffs have failed to show show causation. They failed to connect the dots, and you cannot find for the plaintiff. We don't need to sort of waste time explaining this legal concept. This is picture superiority, in effect. This is that big red map. Everything we need to understand is now, because it's been teed up correctly, you understand it in a snap. Without negligence and causation, you cannot have damages.
So this is really summarizing the hour-and-a-half long dissertation that the judge is going to give as part of the jury instructions.
That's right.
So the jurors will feel a lot more comfortable with this than they will with what they're told.
That's right. And there's so many different versions of this. You know, we've done islands before, but bridges, we've done toll booths that go up and down. But this is the concept, right? And you need to tell this story. So that gets us through timelines and flowcharts, and we're now at maps. And what you've already kind of seen about maps is the first sample that we showed. You know, that was the police chase. And maps, like timelines, can be excellent springboards or keystone graphics that help you launch into other pieces of evidence. Here's a really simple one, right? We've got a top-down satellite map, and we've got some annotation on here. We're going to zoom in, and we're going to show we've got a truck that's backing up. You can see we're not doing anything kind of fancy. We're not doing anything crazy. We are not trying to make this an accident scene recreation. What we are trying to do is put something on the screen that's going to help you as the attorney, as the storyteller, help you tell this story about how this truck was backing up and how it was backing up and it happened to be in the blind spot of this other parked vehicle and how this accident occurred, right? And how the brakes were applied as soon as it was reasonable and it was unforeseen, but it wasn't the fault of the driver. And that's kind of the story here in this case. Maps don't need to be just the function of the story. They don't need to just sort of simply tell the story. What you can also do with maps is what we're doing here is use them to tee up your experts in the case. So here, the map is only designed to orient. So all we're using our map for is to zoom in on this intersection that we're going to see right here. And now we've got our expert diagram. You've probably seen these all over and over in your cases. They're a little bit messy. They're hard to digest. But already because of the map, we've got a lot more context to tee it up. And now we're going to spin it. We're going to fade it into these drawings that we're seeing here. And we're going to go right to the street view. So we've got the map, shortcuts into the expert diagram, shortcuts into the street view, into this really simple case that's really just all about how did this accident occur and where was the left turn sign? And if a no left turn sign was there, would this accident have occurred? That's what this case is about. But what we get to do is we get to use the map to get us there. That's really what we say that this is all about. So maps are not just the end to the story, right? But they can be the beginning of the story. They can be the keystone graphic, or they can be the springboard that gets you into other pieces of evidence.
Scott, there was a question, by the way.
Oh yeah.
So if they're representing a claimant or plaintiff, how would you animate negligence, causation, and damages? That's the prior part.
I mean, if I'm representing a claimant, I would say, I mean, listen, we would have to sort of dig in on the case because we're speaking sort of so abstract here. But what you saw before with the bridges is probably a way to go, you know, where we create a flow chart that has negligence, causation, and damages, and showing how that they all have to be there and connected. And so if you don't have damages, you also don't have a case. So if you have negligence and you have causations, but you still have no damages, right? That's another bridge that can't get crossed, that you can't find for the plaintiff, no matter how bad you feel for them. So that is also sort of another sort of way to go. But this is the kind of stuff that, you know, we talk about. If we're consulting on a case and damages, it's a damages only case, or we're consulting on a case where really negligence and causation are a foregone conclusion, but whether there's massive damages or whether there's no damages at all or an issue, that is something that we still are creating graphics for.
And you can also do it as like a checklist, right? There's going to be the elements of negligence. We're going to prove. You're going to be instructed by the judge at the end of this to A, B, and C. Here's the 4 prongs. We're going to have to be able to prove causation. And you can walk through and show the evidence and put big green check marks and say, yes, we met that burden. You know, the defense, they put big red X's saying, no, we did not, or they did not make that burden. So it's really, the best way that's going to reinforce and drive home
That's right.
your theme tied in with what you have to prove.
Yeah, that's right. I think I think, you know, we're often doing what we call road mapping, right? Where if a whole case for an opening statement, you need negligence, causation, and damages. Negligence is now at the top, and we're going to prove that one. Then move up, next one, causation up the top, and now we'll prove it or disprove it, depending on what side of the V we're on in our case. That's something I used to do back in the prosecutor's office constantly, was sort of fill in the blanks. You know, these are the jury instructions you're going to hear. Let's talk about how we've satisfied them all. But let me show you this last map sample while we have a moment here. Maps don't need to just be top-down satellite images. You can also think about them as diagrams, right? Buildings, diagrams. Here it's the top-down of a cruise ship. And all we're doing is sort of going through the photos here in the slip and fall case. But we're using the diagram that you're seeing here. And that little morphing effect on the left is very similar to what you can kind of do in that application Prezi we were talking about before. But here it's all about where were the warning signs and what was known to the the individual, the plaintiff here in this matter. We've got a slip and fall. We've got rules that are all over sort of the deck of the cruise ship. This is a simple photo walkthrough, but using a map and labels and on-screen annotations and arrows to really tell our story in a narrative way instead of just showing photo after photo after photo. Here, we're going for that big red Verizon map picture superiority. And I think I'm going to show you in a moment, this is how we get there, right? Here's our last image, and here's our gut punch. All these signs. And this is what this, and there's still this incident occurred at some point. Individuals have to be responsible for their own personal safety. And that was really the theme here in this case.
And I really like this type of graphic just because people think of PowerPoint being the slide, move from slide 1 to slide 2 to slide 3. PowerPoint has gotten so powerful when someone like Scott and his team knows what to do with it and how to create something like this, because this really allows you to pace and layer your arguments.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. And then just like timelines, maps can be interactive as well too. And I just wanted you to see, you know, you can turn items on and off, and you can really give yourself a lot of freedom and flexibility. And that's another great thing about maps.
And if you needed it, you could click on any one of those things and pull up a photograph, a picture, a video. You can hyperlink to anything.
Absolutely. We're rolling into sort of the top of the hour, and I want to make sure we hit on these last two buckets because I do think that they're very important. Now, we already talked a little bit about tutorials where Ross said those electronic health records, that flow chart is obviously very much a tutorial as well. This is another one, and this is all about the components of a web page. And what is HTML? And it's just a little breakdown explainer tutorial about what HTML is and what's going on behind a computer that eventually renders the web page that you're seeing. Well, this is a really sort of basic example, and it's going to tee up into, you know, here sort of what was a much more complex case. But before you get into any of that, you've got to make sure your audience knows what HTML is. So this is just another example of a tutorial and using graphics to kind of shortcut and get you to be able to talk about tutorials. And because we're kind of at the top of the hour, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because I want to get to our final bucket. Let me give you one more tutorial example. So this last one here is in a MetaMail case. So tutorials are not just what you hear of in the patent world, right? Which is a tech tutorial where you're explaining an invention. You can also have, like in a MedMal case, like we're seeing here, what is normal blood supply to the brain? And how do we compare that to what happened here in this case? So we got to have to give a tutorial about what normal anatomy is. And here in this case, normal vessels and normal oxygen going to the brain before we can explain what HIE is. Because we've teed it up and we've shown normal anatomy, now that we're showing constricted vessels, you kind of get it. You get what the difference is, and our audience can kind of understand what the story is. And now into our last bucket, data-driven. And so
Scott, real quick question. How do you put tutorials into evidence or in opening and closing?
That's a great question. And so it's very similar to what we were talking about before. You get an expert on the stand, and the expert will have participated in the creation of a PowerPoint that would assist them in illustrating their testimony. that gets litigated, motions in limine ahead of time. But it's the same, it's the same way that you get a medical illustration in evidence, right? This is just the next step. It's a medical illustration on steroids, if you will, right? It is an explainer tutorial that's going to assist that expert in giving almost a lecture about what HIE is. But it's not a lecture, it's a direct examination, because you're going to be leading, you're going to be asking the questions that elicit the answers that inform the tutorial. Everything is done at the direction of the experts, and everything, they adopt this presentation as a part of their testimony, and they use it to explain to the jury. I hope that answers that question. So data-driven graphics is our last bucket, and we only have a couple of minutes. So what we want to say here is this. Data-driven experts, the forensic accountants of the world, have amazing stories to tell. They're gathering data and they're talking about damages, and it's so complex. You just get a stack of financial records on your desk. They need the stories almost more than anybody else does. And so when we're talking about data-driven graphics, we're often sort of talking, this is a timeline here, but what we like to do is turn them into storytellers just like anything else. So we want to be able to put bar charts up on the screen, talk about profits, and then set up these really tight comparisons that show lost profits and let you really walk through what's going on here in this case and what happened over time. So these types of data-driven graphics are really excellent storytellers, and will let you, sort of with a financial expert on the stand, talk about unpaid wages or what's owed to the plaintiff, as we were doing here in this case. And so I know we're sort of toward the end here now of our time. So let me share with you sort of our last kind of final wrap up, and then we'll stick around if anybody has any additional questions. But what we would say is this, right? In summary, we would like you to think about telling stories. If you could ask us, Scott and Ross, I got trial tomorrow, I thought I was going to settle. Should I spend all night working on my story or spend all night working on graphics? We're going to say work on your story. Storytelling is the most important thing. But if you want people to retain your story, if you want people to understand your story, think about using graphics. Think about hiring a graphics consultant, or just think about what you can do to connect your dots for the jury, to make your information more memorable, to make it retained. And to put it to depict it in such a way, in a narrative way, that they understand exactly what you want them to understand, and hopefully it's in a snap, just like that picture superiority big red map that Ross and I were telling you about.
All right, thank you, Scott. I know we're coming up here on the hour. Like Scott said, we will stick around if there's any questions. If you want to speak offline, feel free to reach out to Scott, myself, Peter.
That's right.
Your rep. And we can get you all in touch with the people that you need to speak to. But we want to thank everyone for attending. Happy holidays, and you will be getting your certificate of attendance sometime here in the next week or so.
Thank you all.